Good evening. My name is Yudao today. And I'm a monk here. And Sokuzan has suggested that I talk about Shentong and Rongtong tonight, which is a very serious subject. And just out of curiosity, I wonder how many people here and online have heard of Shentong and Rongtong and studied it. Lots of people here. And mostly there's just postage stamps online. So it seems to be a subject that is misunderstood, and it has helped me a lot in my studies because I really like to study Dharma texts, and I found that they were very confusing and at times contradictory, and I wasn't sure why until I came across this teaching. And it started with a book by Shenpen Hookham called The Buddha Within, and it's about Shentong Rongtong, and she was a student of Khenpo Tsaltrim Gyamtso, not sure I'm saying that right, who was a student of, she was also a student of Chogyam Trungpa, and she did the translation on this book, Progressive Stages of Meditation, which some of you are also familiar with. It's a very good book, and there's a good section in here on Shentong. And it's very simple and easy to understand, which is the Shentong method. So I'll give you a little history and background first, and we'll go into the differences between the Shentong and the Rongtong. So this whole debate began in the 14th century with the Buddha from Dolpo, known as Dolpopa, Sherab Gyaltsen. He was a tantric practitioner. His parents were tantric masters. And when he was in his 20s, he went around to different monasteries and spent some time with the Sakyas and other places until he came across the Jonang monastery in Nepal. He was born in Nepal, and the Jonang monastery, I believe, is actually in Tibet. And he was very impressed by their intense meditation and their focus on meditation. And he was so impressed that he stayed there and became the abbot there of the Jonang monastery. And he developed this Shentong view, which is empty of other. So the Rongtong view, which is the main view of Tibetan Buddhism, mainly through the Gelug school, is empty of self. And the Shentong is empty of other. But it's different than just empty of self and events, or empty of self and other as we normally think of that in the Mahayana. The one that's easier to understand through analysis and through intellectual, the workings of logic through Chandrakirti, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti. So this empty of other is about Buddha nature. And this isn't really accepted by the Prasangika Madhyamikas, and that would be the Gelugpa school. So going back to the historical, Dolpopa, or Sherab Gyaltsen, as he was known, wrote The Ocean of Definitive Meaning, a teaching for the mountain hermit. And there are 2 translations out there on this. I don't remember who did it, and I don't have it written down. But this is a text on the issue of the doctrine of the 3 turnings of the wheel of the Dharma that was codified in the Samdi Nirmochana Sutra, which is a very basic Yogacara sutra from, I believe, the third century, 2nd century, a very early sutra. So this was his specific understanding and interpretation of shunyata and Buddha nature. So this specific reading and the philosophical view behind it became known as Shentong. And this was around the 14th century when this was written and developed. And I understand this was something that came to him in a retreat. And it's been developed through the masters Asanga and Vasubandhu, or from their teachings. So the Jonang monasteries, it's very sad, they were sacked in the 17th century under the direction of the 5th Dalai Lama. And even before that, the ocean of definitive meaning was forbidden in the Gaelic monasteries for many years before that. And then by the 17th century, the monasteries and the other property there were completely confiscated and taken over, converted to the Gaelic school. Tsongkhapa was the one who founded the Gaelic school, and he was very vehemently opposed to this doctrine of Buddha nature and empty of other. So this empty of other isn't just empty of what we think it is. This empty of other is like the third or the second tenet in the order of immediate light, which says the form that consciousness finds is empty as it appears. That would be Rangtong. And full as it is. That would be Shentong. So the Rangtongpas are talking about relative truth when they're talking about empty of self. And the Shentong goes a little further and says, but full as it is Buddha nature. And that is not empty of what it is. It is not empty of these qualities of Buddha nature. It doesn't possess these qualities. It is these qualities. So I digressed a little bit in the history here. So during the past 20 years now, the Jonang tradition has been petitioning the Tibetan government in exile, requesting them to recognize the Jonang as a sixth living Buddhist tradition. So traditionally, there are the four traditions in Tibet, the Kagyu, the Nyingma, the Gelug, and the Sakya. And they also now recognize the Burn tradition, which is the shamanic indigenous religion of Tibet that Padmasambhava apparently found when he came from India. And the 14th Dalai Lama is behind this and is actually helping them to reestablish the Jonang monasteries, and has even appointed a Mongolian who is considered to be an incarnation of Taranatha, who was one of the later Jonang leaders. My extensive notes are coming from a couple of book reports I did. One on the Buddha within, and one was from the Abhisamaya Lamkara, which also addresses the Buddha nature and the third turning and the Shentong view. Mainly, the view comes from the Ratnagotrava Vibhaga. There are a lot of tongue twister words in here, which is the Tantra on Buddha nature. It's not actually Tantra, but it's connected there. This is all in line with the teachings, the Buddha nature teaching. This is Yogacara Madhyamaka. So the Madhyamakas are those who are following Nagarjuna. So both the Rangtong and the Shentong follow Madhyamaka, but the Shentong go further, and they say that the nature of the mind is the emptiness of other than what it is. So Dolpopa taught that the emptiness of self-nature, or the intrinsic nature, applied only to relative truth, while the emptiness of other relative phenomena is characteristic of ultimate truth. So ultimate reality is not empty of its own uncreated, deathless, absolute truth, but only of what is impermanent and illusory. So the analogy usually given in that, one of them, is gold in ore. So everything around the gold would be the defilements that do not belong to the Buddha nature. They are not the Buddha nature, but it's there. So it's a matter of uncovering. It's not a matter of improving or gaining merit in order to attain something. It's not an attainment. So other ways that might be easier to understand with Shentang and Rangtong are basically their terms for the mode of emptiness. And Rangtong has written a lot about this because they are a very analytical group. So in particular, this the Buddha Within book was a PhD thesis. And her sources for that were the lamas of the Kagyu and the Nyingma practice lineages, in particular Khenpo Saltram Jamso. So in Shentang, the emptiness of the Buddha's wisdom mind is not self-emptiness, but emptiness of other, which is the true nature of reality. The Rangtong view, the Rangtong is not wrong, but the Rangtong view is best for cutting through all reference points. And the Shentang view is more useful for describing and facilitating meditation experience and realization, but it requires a great deal of faith. It's not based on an analysis. In Shentang, Tathagatagarbha is Buddha Jnana, or the mind of the Buddha, the knowing mind of the Buddha. So Buddha Jnana is called Tathagatagarbha when it's veiled in ordinary beings. And once revealed, then this is the wisdom mind of the Buddha, Buddha Jnana, or Buddha Jnana. So, as I said, Rangtong is the majority view in Tibet. The approach is logical and analytical. It interprets the sutras differently. And part of the problem here is that they use the same terms and describe them differently, so the definitions don't match up. It's very confusing to sort it all out. Because what the Gelugpas mean by non-dual awareness is not what the Shentangpas mean. So the Rangtong is only describing what we mistakenly think we experience, or apparent reality. So other Tibetan scholars who don't accept the Gelugpa view say this leaves a faint residue of concept. So there is someone who is seeing this, and so even in Buddhas, there's a subjective viewing of this self-emptiness. And the danger here is that they will just keep negating everything, and they will miss the luminous, clear mind that is the Buddha wisdom mind. So Rangtong is considered a teaching lineage, referred to as transmission dharma. It's an oral tradition that focuses on scripture. So correctly understood, Rangtong is seen as a basis for Shentang, according to the Kagyu and Nyingma lamas. And Hukam states that a true understanding of Rangtong emptiness is none other than Shentang. So Shentang emphasizes meditation. It's considered a practice lineage called the realization dharma. where the teacher's own realization is transmitted to the student. So it's very necessary to have a teacher in a Shantang tradition. So, as I said, the Gelugpa view is that there must be a subjective awareness of something, even in Buddhas. But for the Shantang, this constitutes a conceptual contrivance, or prapancha, the continuing proliferation of thought. It seems like the Rangtangs have to describe anything in many more words than seem necessary to do that. So anything like Jeffrey Hopkins describes very much from the Gelug point of view, and he's extremely wordy. And where he can use 25 words to say something, it seems like he needs 2,500. And then he puts dashes between everything besides. This is very hard to understand. But that said, there are people who understand this much better because they have an analytical and reasoning mind, and maybe this is a pathway for them. So it's not an incorrect way to practice. But our lineage is mainly Yogacara Madhyamaka, which the Gelugpas would probably say doesn't exist. You're either a Madhyamaka or you're not. But Yogacara Madhyamaka seems to take it a little bit further. So that Tathagata exists must be approached by faith. It does not exist as a conceptually graspable entity by ordinary consciousness. And the reason they talk about qualities or gunas is that without qualities, nothing exists. How can you know anything, even with a non-conceptual knowing, unless there is some quality? So reliance on faith is an important concept in Shantang. Then they also view things like the three natures are viewed very differently in the two traditions, as are ground, path, and fruition. For Shantang, the ground or the base is sometimes said to be Tathagata. The path is the purification, and the fruition is the Buddha mind, Buddha Jnana. So emptiness and of luminosity, Buddha nature's wisdom being empty of adventitious stains or anything that's extraneous to it, anything that's imaginary. It is empty of that. That's the view of the Shantang. So other empty applies mainly to features within the basis of the nature of phenomena, or to the compound meaning of this basis, the nature of phenomena, being empty of features, but not to the basis itself. An inferential understanding of being self-empty is accomplished more easily through valid cognition, is what the Gelugpas would say. But for us, this is something that is only accomplished, if you can even say it's an accomplishment, through meditation and faith and with a teacher. So Mikyo Dorje is also aligned with the Shantang and says the unchanging perfect nature is the true basis of emptiness. And then there is argument about what is the second turning and the third turning. So these arguments with Shantang and Rangtang are still ongoing. And the Gelugpas, they really like to debate. So Ultimate reality cannot be ascertained through valid cognition as being known or realized to be either arisen or unarisen. So emptiness is naturally endowed with these aspects of appearance, luminosity, bliss, and awareness. You have to describe it somehow, even that might be too much. So in order to be liberated, emptiness needs to be realized in a double fashion, and this is from Dolpopa. There are two sides of the same coin, so everything is unreal and lacks nature. And number two is to realize the true nature of mind that realizes the former. So the nature of mind that realizes that everything is empty. The mind's natural luminosity is the basis of emptiness. So I could ask for questions at this point, it might help me. Sokazan?
So using the word, and which I'd like you to say something about valid cognition and how that relates to wrong tongue, and how, what is the difference between how it relates to wrong tongue and how that relates to shen tongue? Thank you.
I will try. My understanding is that valid cognition is two or three things. It's through direct cognition, or through inference, or sometimes they say it's through someone who knows, finding that out from someone who knows. And it's something that we don't really use in our practice. And Shentong doesn't really use valid cognition, as far as I know. It's just, I don't hear it talked about in that way.
The wrong tongue?
In Shentong, it's more of a wrong tongue.
It is a form of wrong tongue, valid cognition?
I think so. It comes from the Gelugpas, as far as I know.
Okay. And so what kind of cognition happens, or does cognition happen in Shentong, or empty of other? And if not, is there a descriptor for that is similar to the one for wrong tongue?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure how it would be said. Maybe they would say that direct cognition is the only way, not inference, not understanding from someone else.
Is your understanding that cognition has to do with concept?
I think there are two kinds. In my understanding, there's the cognitive awareness, and then there's the awareness that is non-cognitive, just awareness that you teach. And that's what I understand is what is able to see Buddha nature.
Thank you.
Shoto?
Shoto bowing. With that image of gold, I think the idea of purifying was used. Is there a way to look at purification that doesn't get rid of the impurities? Bowing.
And that's a good question. I think it's just the path, just continuing on the path and continuing to look at it. That there's not anything to get rid of or push away. It's just something to be seen through or to be seen. I think there's several other examples from the Ratnagotrabhaga about covered up Buddha nature, like the I don't know, one of them I think was a statue of a Buddha wrapped in a rag on the side of the road, and there's a few others. Just things that need to be uncovered, exposed. Does that help?
Shoto bowing. Still seems like something has to happen, which seems fishy. Like, is the Buddha seen in the rags? Bowing.
I think so. I think so. I don't think it just suddenly is something you suddenly get rid of, and then there's just the Buddha. There's just the gold. I think it is already pure. It's talked about that way as in the base path and fruition, is that it is already pure even though it's in, like in the gold and ore example, even though it's in there, it's still pure there. So it's perfect as it is, but to be seen is the awakening of the Buddha wisdom mind, Buddha jnana. That's my understanding from this reading.
Thank you. And I had one more. With Rongtong and Shentong, are both of those views illusory?
As concepts, yeah, they are. They're because they're views. Just a way of pointing, I think.
Mozuku bowing. The way you talked about qualities was really helpful, I just want to say. So I'm not directly asking about that, but luminosity, bliss, and awareness, are those, well, first of all, those are qualities, yes? Or am I still confused about that?
I think they are qualities.
Are they the qualities? Are there additional qualities? I mean, obviously you could have additional words for the same things, but
I think there aren't very many descriptors for it because even those are kind of extra. But if you have to say something, then I think that comes close to what they mean by qualities, because they aren't things that arise with, they're just not separate from it. So they're just ways of describing the knowing, because there has to be some way of knowing that. Does that help?
it does. I had a separate question though too. You said that non-dual awareness was defined differently between the Shentong and Rangtong. Can you say more about how that is different?
I don't know if I can. I know that the Rangtong are usually talking about the relative. They go to great lengths to explain that Paratantra, or the dependently arisen, is the base and that which we need to look at because it's real. Up until then they say, this is actually not real either, it's empty. And there's much elaboration there, whereas the Shentong just go right to know it's also unreal. And so I'm not sure how non-dual would work there. Let's see if I can find my note on that. They're applying it to the relative, I guess, the non-dual. And the Shentongpas are going beyond the relative to apply it to the ultimate as the ultimate being, non-dual awareness. That's as far as I can go with that, I think.
Mozuku-ban, would non-dual awareness be similar to perception only or consciousness only? Or is it something else entirely?
I think it would be similar, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if it would be a valid definition. You okay?
Bowing, what appears in emptiness of other?
Well, technically, in the Shentong sense, nothing would appear, but it would, as an appearance, is not real. But I don't know how you would talk about it, really. As not an appearance, I guess those qualities you could use as part of what's there. But I don't know if you could actually call it an appearance.
Bowing, what qualities Do they say point at the appearance or point at emptiness of other?
So the few things that are used are luminosity, clear light mind. They're things that are not clearly defined even. They're things that we can't really grasp onto as a meaning or something to work towards or something to look for. It's not something you can find because it already is there in my understanding. So I'm not really sure how to describe what appears or what is seen there.
Do they talk about it as like an undefinition, a lack of definition?
Well, it's talked about as something through faith and through working with a teacher, through being able to see that, through practice realization in the tradition of transmission of realization instead of just information. So it's something that you could maybe call like an experience of that, but not, of course, it wouldn't be called an experience exactly because that would be an occurrence. And so you can hardly say anything about it, and yet the Rongtong, they managed to say a lot about everything, including the Shentong view. So that's confusing. There's much less analysis in the Shentong tradition, although lots of things are written about Buddha nature and Buddha mind and by scholars who are better at words than I am, for sure.
Thank you. I have a question on YouTube from Ath in the UK. He says, what about the cognition generated on dreams? Any difference between the two approaches? Thanks.
Well, the dreams are another illusion, so there wouldn't be any difference there. We just don't have as much control there. It's more obvious on awakening that we're not in control, but there wouldn't be a difference, really. Chodo?
Shoto bowing, is the concept of empty of other similar to the concept of Paramatman bowing?
Param Atman, so the true self. Well, interesting you should ask that, because Dolpopa actually started using words like that as the true self and the true soul, which put a lot of people off, pointing at a self. But he also said that the Buddha nature is something within us, a perfect nature that's within us, rather than saying we are that. So I think sometimes it's talked about that way. I'm not sure where the word Param Atman, I don't know where that originated as far as a school or a teaching that was saying that.
Shoto bowing, just in case people aren't familiar, I'm basically is saying there's no others, the same thing as saying it's just self bowing.
Well, it wouldn't be self, because that implies something that has an inherent existence.
Why is that?
Well, usually when we say no self, Rongtong is no self and Shentong is no other, but the Shentong view includes the no self. So there's no self and no other. It's not one or the other. Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Om Dabaya. You have such a deep understanding of the differences in the schools. How does this show up on the cushion for you, bowing?
It doesn't usually show up there.
Om Dabaya, I mean, does this deeper understanding impact your practice, bowing?
Thank you. I was really looking at that, like, how is this important? This difference is important to know this? Well, obviously they didn't even talk about it until the 14th century. So I don't think it's necessary to make those distinctions. For me, it's been helpful in my studying. Lots of people here like to study Jay Garfield, and he's a Madhyamikan, but he's not a Shenton practitioner. So he's not a Yogacara Madhyamikan. So if you're reading Jay Garfield and he starts telling you about emptiness is this and not this and not this, it could be confusing if you're also reading some Yogacara texts, anything with Vasubandhu, Asanga. So there are differences. And Jay Garfield, he's at Harvard. I mean, he's a very intelligent and knowledgeable scholar. So it's certainly a valid approach, but it isn't the same as my understanding of Zen or Kagyu or any of the masters that we study here, the texts.
Hondo bowing. I want to try one more time. It seems like doing such a deep dive in the concepts, and that it's clear it's bringing understanding, or at least that's my projection, that it seems like that would somehow show up on the cushion in that, when you're looking at your mind, you're looking at it maybe in a more nuanced way. Is that true or not?
The concepts don't come up for me on the cushion so much. I think I do the same spinning around and trying to return to observation that I've done before. I'm not sure if it really is deepening my understanding on the cushion, but conceptually it's been helpful for me to sort out my confusion about what I'm reading.
Thank you.
Chokodawa.
Chokodao bowing. I want to know, well, I appreciate your presentation of this material. And it makes me wonder if you can make connections from Rangtong and Shenton or other material to things Sokuzan teaches, like not separate. Like, do those concepts help you access concepts that we're receiving from the teacher?
Yes, yeah, they definitely do. Inseparable is a Shenton teaching, so it is helpful. And so the things that I resonate with, because I have a teacher, they are from the Shenton perspective, mostly. And so yes, I hear Sokuzan's teaching in lots of the Shenton writings. Sokuzan?
So you saw your teacher throw a fit a little while ago, didn't you? So how is that a not separate teaching? You see it?
The only response I could come up with is, how is it not a not separate teaching?
Thank you. Well, the classical way of saying it is a mirror. If you have a teacher, you're always looking in a mirror. I don't care how they act. This doesn't mean that that teacher can't be fundamentally abusive from a relative point of view. Totally can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Shodo?
Show bowing, you touched on it a little bit, but when the monasteries got sacked, was there a lot of violence in that? I'm curious if you could go into that at all, if you know anything about it, bowing.
I don't really know, but that book had been banned for 150 years before they finally came in and sacked it. I don't know if people were killed or if they were just booted out and the Gelugpas took over. but it's kind of a nasty stain on that particular lineage that happened. And now I think there are Gelugpas who are supportive of this view. And this is only one Prasangika view, so usually like the political power is the Gelugpas in Tibet. They're the Prasangika view, the Rangtong view, so it's a majority view, but a lot of them are shifting and including more, like the Rime movement includes the Nyingma and the Sakyas, some of the Sakyas and the Kagyu, and they're much more inclusive of other Buddhist views, and I think the Gelugpas are getting there too.
Could you say something about Prasanga, Prasangika, what that means?
The Prasangika Madhyamikas are, they are the Rangtong view, except there are a few that aren't. So in Khenpo Seltram Jamso's book, he breaks out Madhyamaka into two, and one is a Prasangika, and they're called the consequence school, because everything you say, there's a consequence that ends in the negation. There's just nothing. And then there's a Sarvastivadin view, which is the autonomous view, which I don't fully understand, but their arguments are standalone. They stand by themselves.
Will you recommend that book for others if they wanted to go into
This,
it?
yes, I would recommend this if you
Could
want to
say what it
understand the
is and who it's
schools. This is the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. Khenpo Seltram Jamso, who just recently died. And he was a very wonderful teacher, and I believe he's in the Kagyu lineage, or was.
And I
maybe.
wanted to say that
Maybe
I knew some of his close students, and one of his instructions to them was, please read this 10 times.
And you told me to read it 10 times, and I said, okay.
That was copy, yeah.
Oh, and then when I said okay, you said read it 100 times. I think I'm only on number 4, but
Well, good, good. You proceed.
did that answer your question?
Yes, it did,
So,
thank you very much.
We have a few minutes if there are final questions.
Jishin bowing.
Jishin.
You probably clarified this during your talk, but there was so much information that I got lost. So my question is about the difference between being a Buddha nature and possessing the quality of Buddha nature. Is the difference bowing?
So Buddha nature can't possess anything because it isn't a thing itself. There's no subject-object there between Buddha nature and the qualities of Buddha nature. So it simply just is those qualities. There's no separation there. I don't know if it can really be grasped conceptually, but that's the way it's talked about in the teachings. Does that help?
Jishin bowing, thank you. I'm trying to find any analogy in something relative, if to understand it. If you relate to the human being, we believe that we have qualities, and we can recognize those qualities. Is there any teaching in it to better understand what you just explained about Buddha nature and qualities of Buddha nature? Bowing.
I'm not sure. I think in the tradition, the gunas or the qualities are talked about differently than characteristics. So the only thing that helps me to understand what qualities are versus characteristics is that there has to be some way of knowing something that you can talk about even with the wisdom of the Buddha mind. So if you talk about it as a quality, you can say luminosity, but it's not light. It's not just light. Or clear mind. The only way you can talk about it is with qualities that we really can't nail down. But there has to be something. Otherwise, if you're just looking for emptiness, you're going to fall into nihilism, and then there's just nothing.
Is perception something which is knowing those qualities? Bowing.
I'm not sure if perception actually knows anything. So I am a little, I don't know how to compare perception and the wisdom of the Buddha mind. So, I mean, we have sense fields, which is the only way we can practice and know things. But the knowing of the Buddha wisdom mind is, I guess you'd have to say, transcends just what's coming in through the sense fields. But
And
that,
then, sorry.
go ahead.
And then how Buddha nature can know those qualities through that those processes of senses. Bowing.
I don't know if I can, I don't know.
Thank you.
Jeff Bowing.
Go ahead, Jeff.
There seemed to have been a dichotomy of like science versus faith, and you kind of alluded to maybe like they're the same thing. Personally, I'm experiencing some of that when I meditate. What are your personal experiences of science versus faith in meditation, Jeff Bowing?
No, both of them are a bit difficult because I don't know. In Buddhism, faith isn't in a particular thing unless it's our practice and our path. So it's not scientific, but it's interesting that a lot of the science is lining up with some of the Buddhist concepts of no self, no fundamental nature of reality, no fundamental material time and space. So that's about all I could say. Okay, thank you very much.
Penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi shi fu shi son bu sa mo ko sa mo ho ja the 10 directions, the 3 times, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.